Of course, it is now time for the press preview, a first look at the papers as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and the Conservative commentator Tim Montgomerie. And, get this, they're going to be here right through until midnight. Sorry, guys, I hope someone told you about this for our extended news review. But first, let's take you through the front pages that we have. Pretty much all, I think. The Eye reporting that people in certain areas of England could have their second COVID vaccinations brought forward in an effort to contain the spread of the Indian variant of COVID-19. More on that in just a second. The Telegraph, understanding that the government's vaccine task force won't be issuing a definitive recommendation on whether to inoculate children. They're going to be leaving the decision instead to the Prime Minister. Here's the Times. It hears that it could still be mandatory to wear face masks, even after a possible loosening of restrictions on June the 21st. And the Mail says its campaign to build a permanent memorial to the victims of the pandemic at St Paul's Cathedral has now raised enough money to allow the project to go ahead. And here's the Mirror. It has word of a new drug which could combat the effects of Alzheimer's disease. Big story if true. The Express. It's leading with calls to ban firms from hiking prices for customers who stay with them for longer. The FT, as always, ploughing a slightly different furrow. Latest news on inflation in the United States. And here is the Star. It thinks we might be able to save the planet by working a 4-day week. As you can see, we're joined by Susie Boniface and Tim Montgomerie. Lovely to see both of you. Let's start this hour with you, Tim. The front page of the Daily Telegraph. This is an interesting one. I mean, the headline kind of takes us quite a way through the story. It's going to be the Prime Minister who's going to be deciding on whether or not children receive inoculations.
Absolutely. And up until now, the advisory task force on vaccines has sort of led, there was that debate, you'll remember, Niall, about whether vaccines are given first to, for example, frontline workers, teachers and other police officers. But they very much stuck with the general view that the older groups were most vulnerable, they should get the vaccine first. And since then, we've progressed through the vaccination programme on age. But on this issue, this very sensitive issue of whether we vaccinate children, they aren't going to be definitive. They're going to give the Prime Minister and the Cabinet options, give all of us, therefore, I hope it will be transparently published, give us all the information on what the pros and cons are of vaccinating children. But it'll be ultimately the government that takes the decision. And of course, some people want children vaccinated. We know that younger people at the moment are leading the spread of the Indian variant. But at the same time, as with the clotting issue that was associated with certain vaccinations, do we want to expose children who very, very few cases die of COVID? Do we want to expose them to the small, but nonetheless sometimes real risks of a vaccination? And so, very difficult decision for the government coming up.
I mean, Susie, do we know, because I can't see it in the article, do we know if the JCVI has done this of its own volition or perhaps at the behest of our political leaders? I mean, one thing, you don't need to spend long on social media to discover that there are plenty of scientists out there at the moment rather staggered at the lack of information that is being published about infection among younger people.
Yeah, and we don't know quite as to why JCVI have made this decision. I think they've let the public down a little bit, to be honest, to say that this should be down to Boris Johnson. I don't really trust his opinion about anything to do with children, especially as he seems to be permanently surprised when his behaviour leads them to keep on turning up. But I think also he's not an expert in whether or not children should be vaccinated. The experts in that are the JCVI. And so therefore, if that has to be done or should be done and is safe to be done and the therapeutic benefits of it outweigh any risks, then that should be up to the experts. I think the evidence the past year and a half has proven quite significantly, really, that Boris Johnson isn't an expert in these things, doesn't so much follow the science as follow along about 3 weeks behind it, sort of shambling along and whistling and kicking a stone until he feels like eventually turning up and coming to heel. And he's more likely to do, I think, whatever the person nearest to him suggests he does, which in the absence of Dominic Cummings is Carrie Simmons, and in the absence of her is probably the dog. So I would prefer if the JCVI made this decision, to be brutally honest.
Take us then Tim, to the front of the eye. I mean, again, there are concerns about the Indian variant, although as people are pointing out, we're not seeing hospitals at capacity, just a significant increase that perhaps points the way ahead. But if you squint at this story, fast second jags to beat the new variant, I mean, in a roundabout way, this is a good story about the vaccine, about the efficacy of the vaccines in dealing with the Indian variant.
Yeah. And I think that's absolutely what everyone watching this programme tonight should be reassured by. Of course, we've got to be vigilant about the Indian variant. And I think about 75% of new cases now are associated with the Indian variant. So it's absolutely the dominant thread as we continue to face this COVID pandemic. But vaccinations are proving to be effective against it. And we can be really reassured about that. The government's next initiative is to reduce the gap between the first jab and the second jab, because they have the legitimate, well-founded confidence in the vaccine. If we get people vaccinated fully more quickly, particularly those who are vulnerable, will be safer. One of the little bullet points there in the eye that attracted my attention was that still 49% of the British people in a poll that's been done for the eye don't want restrictions lifted. They're still very cautious. And I think that communicates a lot about where the British people really have been throughout this pandemic. Lots of people, particularly in the media, pundits, including people like myself, have wanted to lift restrictions more quickly because we're worried about the impact of these restrictions, not just on the economy, but on, cancer treatments and the other things that the NHS is so important for. But I think the public remains very cautious, very concerned about this pandemic. And I think as the government takes decisions, that probably be weighing heavily on their minds.
Susie, I suppose we can link the point that Tim's just made to the front page of the Times and the idea that aspects of the COVID strategy, in particular the keeping face masks on, could persist after June the 21st. I mean, if that poll is correct, then perhaps we won't see the fireworks that some might predict if we're all asked, to continue to wear face masks after that date.
Yeah, the Times front page it's a bit bizarre, really, because it claims that, the government is thinking about guidance on working from home and wearing face masks. And frankly, whatever the government rules on this is irrelevant. If you want to work from home, you're already doing it and you're going to keep on doing it. If you don't want to, and if you don't want to be wearing face masks, then what the government says is going to make no difference. People are working from home anyway. Their businesses are making them work from home in many cases. Lots of people prefer it. And I, for one, I'm going to be keeping my face mask probably for the foreseeable every winter when I go around the place if I get slightest sniffle. And most people I know would say the same thing. So what the government says about that is probably fairly irrelevant. And as far as the iFront page is concerned about the possibility of having faster second jabs, I'm pretty certain I read that somewhere a week, 10 days ago. And it still isn't government policy. It's still something they're just suggesting. But the little bullet point there that caught my eye, other than the one that caught Tim's, was the fact that SAGE scientists say this will slow down the start of the third wave. Not stop it, not that it's even under discussion anymore, we might even not have a third wave. It just slows down the start of the next wave, which, as SAGE has been saying for a couple of months now, is going to be over the summer, in time for autumn, at the end of lifting restrictions. It's exactly as SAGE predicted. SAGE advice, as ever.
Tim, the front of the Telegraph, one of those stories which you always just slightly raise eyebrows when it gets snuck out on a Friday afternoon of a bank holiday weekend. But Boris Johnson has... I am. I too work as a broadcast journalist. Look, Boris Johnson, cleared of wrongdoing, but his advisor on standards suggesting that he acted unwisely. And guess which aspect of his report Number 10 are fixated on this evening?
Absolutely. Well, look, I'm a Conservative. I'm a supporter of Boris Johnson in most respects, but I do think this is a very... It draws attention to what people already worry about Boris Johnson, is that he's just cavalier with, the specifics of initiatives and specifics of programmes. And the very fact that you could begin to undertake a refurbishment of your own living quarters at a cost of £150,000, £200,000, and not be sure about how it's funded. A lot of people watching tonight will just be scratching their heads at how anyone could be considering embarking on that scale of expense without knowing how it's going to be funded. So I think that he's got away, the Prime Minister's got away with this official report. I thought the report was a little bit harsh on blaming officials for not warning the Prime Minister that he should be paying more attention to this. But I do think a lot of people who read about this it will confirm their suspicion that the Prime Minister isn't as focused on the detail and the specifics of things as he should be, not just on this matter, but generally.
Susie, one suspects that you might have a view on this story.
If I, as a journalist, was accused of bad behaviour and was reported to the press regulator for considering my ethical behaviour, and I then went and appointed a new head of the press regulator who subsequently completely exonerated me of any wrongdoing, that would be quite rightly called a stitch-up. And that's exactly what's happened here. It's a stitch-up. Interestingly, throughout Goet's report, he uses the phrase that Boris Johnson didn't want to burden the taxpayer, which is entirely a political point to make. It's something the Conservative Party makes a lot, that he had no wish to burden the taxpayer, so he's very kindly footed the bill himself. He burdened the taxpayer with a minimum, what the taxpayer has paid, of £30,000 to do up an apartment which had been done up only 2 years previously, purely because his girlfriend didn't fancy the decor. And that's just not... That's not being kind to the taxpayer in the least. That's doing us 30 grand. Thank you very much. He should be paying back the whole lot. If he's got 60 grand, he's suddenly found down the back of the sofa, he could pay back the rest, can't he?
Susie? Tim? Sorry, Tim, we are going to have to pause there. We do need to get to the break. Don't worry, you'll have another chance to crack on with that one. Pause there for a second. But coming up after the break, does turning a controversial statue to face the wall do anything to address the legacy of it? We'll be discussing that next. Welcome back to the press preview. Susie and Tim still here. And Susie, Anthony Gormley has come up with, I have to say, a fairly innovative suggestion to the problems of the statue of Sir Cecil Rhodes at Oxford University.
Yeah, he suggested that where Cecil Rhodes' statue is at the moment above a gateway, it's sort of facing out like a, I don't know, you've got like a statue in an alcove that's facing outwards. And Gormley is suggesting that it remain there, but it be turned around and face backwards, face the wall, as it were, to sort of indicate the shame with which he is regarded, but yet to continue acknowledging that the college has an awful lot of contacts and money and property as a result of Rhodes' riches. Now, there are Tory backbench MPs, one of them, my friend Sir John Hayes, has said in there that this is a completely wacky idea and makes no sense at all. I think last time I heard, the statue of Edward Colston that got thrown in the river in Bristol had been dredged out, but was being sort of preserved with the graffiti to go into a new museum to sort of, tell the story more fully, I suppose, of how that statue sort of went through a sort of time span and things that changed to it. I think that using that statue in such a way that, we regarded the different public attitudes towards it during time would be beneficial. I can't see it being bad, put it that way.
Tim, a quick word from you on this, I have to say, because my thoughts only extend as far as Total Eclipse of the Heart by Bonnie Tyler. It's been going through my head ever since I started reading this story, and you know exactly why.
Well, I'm more of a traditionalist on this, and I think the amount of time we're spending on what to do with these historic statues is a real distraction from what we really should be doing, and certainly what students at Oxford should be focusing on. I'm generally in favour of putting up more statues to honour different kind of heroes, rather than somehow destroying or covering with graffiti statues of old.
And Tim, let's stick with you. The Times. There's Wally. Wally the walrus. What on earth's going on with this story, please?
Oh, well, this is a lovely story. Susie actually picked it out for us. And most of us are stuck in the United Kingdom at the moment, unless we're going to the Champions League final, unable to travel abroad. But this walrus has drifted, first of all, on some sort of ice floe down from the Antarctic region, I think, and been in Ireland, been in Wales, and now in France. And so it seems to be having a wonderful time. And I think a lot of us will be jealous.
Yeah, Susie, it's the holiday that I had planned for this year. Instead of walrus is taking it, and I'm stuck here in the bank holiday.
Yeah, we have no idea if Wally's going to go on and try and catch the match in Porto, or if he's heading to the Mediterranean for a sunshine break. But he is finding it a lot easier to get away than the rest of us, so power to him.
I was going to say, he does look a little bit like a Chelsea fan that I know very well, but no, we're all